We're so excited to be interviewing Angeline Dukes. And hi, Angeline, how are you?
Hi.
Hello. I'm good. How are y'all?
Good,
Great.
good.
Awesome. Well, we just wanted to thank you so much for sitting down with us today and welcome all our wonderful students and Carleton community for joining us on this amazing live chat today. We'll wait maybe one more minute for more people to join. But if anyone has any questions for the end of this interview, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll be answering them at the end. Awesome. All
So I
right.
guess we could start with some introductions. I'll go first. My name is Turiro Flasla. I work with Carleton STAR, which is Carleton Stress, Trauma, and Resilience, which is an interdisciplinary research group under the HIME Centre. So Lilo, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Lilo, and I work with the HIME Center as a senior communications intern. And HIME is a neuroscience, oh my goodness, is a neuroscience research center here at Carleton University. And we're partnering with STAR today to bring on our wonderful guest, Angeline Dukes.
And hello, everyone. I'm Angeline Dukes. I am a fifth-year PhD candidate at the University of California, Irvine. I'm also the founder and current president of Black and Neuro, and I'll be talking about what Black and Neuro is and everything that we've done so far.
Amazing. So let's jump right into the first question. So what prompted you to start Black and Neuro, and how did you go about this?
Yeah, so it was summer of 2020. I'm sure everyone remembers everything that was going on that summer, but it was, a lot was happening, especially being Black both in the US, but also worldwide, just being a Black person and having to experience various, or being shown in our faces the very blatant police brutality and also instances of racism and prejudices that Black people face. And it was a lot. And it was feeling very isolating as a Black academic, especially because although we saw these conversations happening on social media and in the news, they weren't necessarily happening in academic spaces. And so that felt very isolating. And so I really wanted to have a space where we could talk about these topics, but also to really just like celebrate Black people in the field of neuroscience in particular. And that's kind of how Black and Neuro got started. So I saw other groups like Black Birders Week, they were celebrating Black people out in nature, and Black and Astro was celebrating Black people in astronomy. And I'm like, I know there has got to be more Black neuroscientists than the handful that I know. And so I really just wanted to create a space where we could all meet and get to know each other. And that's kind of what it's really grown into, is this whole community of Black neuroscientists all around the world. And it really started with a tweet. Like, social media is amazing for getting things started and to keep them going. And so that's how we've been able to connect with hundreds of Black neuroscientists worldwide, is really through social media. And then, of course, on our website now, we have profiles of different Black scientists, so that way anyone can find, a Black scholar in the field of neuroscientists to serve on panels, to, if you're looking for people to recruit for your graduate programs or for a postdoc, or to hire as faculty. Like, there's so many incredible people out there. And so I'm just really grateful that Black and Neuro was able to grow and to be a resource for that.
Yes, it's incredibly inspiring, especially for me. I don't know if I mentioned, but I am a neuroscience student. I'm in my third year, and it's been amazing kind of watching, like, just being able to enter the space and see a lot of other people doing the same thing as me. So I know that you went to Fisk University, which is HBCU, a historically Black university. What was that like?
It was amazing. I truly loved my experience at Fisk. That is where I met like my best friends. I met my husband there. It's where I had my first Black professor. That was where like I first met Black women who were in science, who were doing the things that I wanted to do, which was just the best place for me to be, to have that type of support and to build that support system that has sustained me so much. And I think my experience at my HBCU is why I was able to know what it felt like to have that sense of community, of other Black scholars who are just as passionate about science and just as much into it. And so because of that, that's helped me really grow Black and Neuro into what it was, because I know what that feels like. But going to an HBCU was like absolutely incredible, and it really did lay the foundation for everything I've been able to do so far.
I love that. I honestly, I'm kind of jealous. It sounds like it would be like an incredible experience. So kind of just pushing on to the neuroscience type of things. So you've done a few studies on nicotine and cannabinoids, which are becoming increasingly relevant in our younger communities. We've kind of seen like the popularization of like vapes and stuff like that. So kind of, I know that you've done some research on this, so you're really qualified to kind of speak on this. Tell us about how behaviors can be affected by nicotine and cannabinoid exposure in adolescents.
Yeah, so I'm looking at adolescent exposure to nicotine and cannabinoids like THC. I look at it in a mouse model, right? And so really mostly because I can't go give teens, like human teenagers, drugs and be like, oh, how does this affect you? I don't think their parents would be too happy. And so we use a mouse model to do this, right? And it's really effective because the mice, they grow up fairly quickly and it's really easy to see, okay, if they've been exposed to these drugs during adolescence, how does that impact their brain, their behavior? Does it make them more prone to drug-taking behavior in adulthood? You know, what are the different implications of that? And so we've found quite a few interesting things so far. So I have a couple of first author papers published on these. But really what I do is I've been using the synthetic cannabinoids. So there's different kinds of cannabinoids. Your body makes endogenous cannabinoids. There's also, you know, plant cannabinoids like THC and CBD. And then there's synthetic ones that can be man-made in a laboratory. And so I've been using the synthetic cannabinoid WIN, which is man-made. And so it acts on the same receptors as THC does. And it's a little bit easier to administer as well. And so I've been exposing the mice to WIN or to nicotine or co-exposing them to both, because what we're seeing is that teenagers are also co-using these drugs, right? So it's not like they're only, you know, smoking weed or they're only vaping cigarettes, but oftentimes we see like this co-exposure where they're using both. And so I have this co-exposure group too, and I'm looking both in males and females. And what we're seeing is that male mice that were exposed to WIN, which is that cannabinoid, are co-exposed to nicotine and WIN together during adolescence, they actually take more nicotine in adulthood. So what that means is, like, if a, you know, teenage male was smoking weed or was smoking weed and cigarettes as an adolescent, then in adulthood they might be, you know, smoking more cigarettes then. What's interesting is that in females we're actually seeing an opposite effect, in that this adolescent cannabinoid exposure is they're actually administering less nicotine in adulthood, which is really interesting. And I feel like this is why it's really important to look at both sexes. I think oftentimes in research they tend to like just focus on the males, and you're completely missing half of the population by doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the intersection. I think we're talking a lot today about, you know, being Black, and it's Black History Month, but there's also the intersection of being a woman as well. And it affects so much, not just in terms of research, but in terms of how we live, how we're treated. And there's, you know, a massive population, 50% of the population essentially, who are treated differently, but also have, you know, less research dedicated to us. And a lot of our kind of like studies that have been created for, you know, looking at diseases and stuff like this is based around men. So I think it's really interesting that there's that kind of sex difference that you observed there.
Yeah, for sure, which perfectly leads us into our next question. So historically, a lot of health science models base everything on white men. So have you ever been able to be involved in a project that considers intersectionality within science?
So most of what I'm doing now, just looking at, you know, the different sex differences, but since most of my work has been done in animal models, I haven't necessarily looked at intersectionality in terms of like race in regards to research. But I will say that it is incredibly important whenever you are, you know, you hear about these studies coming out, right? Anything related to health or to medicine or anything like that. It's important to look at the demographics of the people that were sampled for those studies, right? Are they only looking at, you know, an older white population? Because if that's the case, then as a young Black woman, you know, that might not relate to me as much as it relates to somebody else, right? And the implications of that are huge, because if we're basing all of these metrics on these things, so for example, and I have a big beef with this, it's BMI, right? So like body mass index. I am not a fan at all of those metrics. And, you know, when I go to, and it could also be like a personal thing, right? Whenever I go to the doctor and they're like, oh, you're considered obese, I'm like, I don't think so, because, you know, historically, right, and like the way that my genes are and the way that my ancestors are and the ways in which we've had to develop, and like my hips are wider, right, as compared to the metrics that it was originally based off of, which was not a Black woman, right? And so although I might be considered obese in that context, I personally feel like there should be separate metrics for, you know, looking at a Black woman as opposed to a white man.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not a neuroscientist or a scientist at all for that matter. I'm a journalist. But in my field, it's so important to have a diverse newsroom and a diverse array of sources when you're writing any kind of piece of media. And I'm sure the same applies to any kind of research you do in science. And do you think that having a white lens, you touched on this a bit, but do you think having a white lens when looking at healthcare or science can be harmful? And if so, why?
Oh, absolutely. Having a white lens to look at, any aspect of things, but especially science is very detrimental, especially when you're not considering the populations that you're actually trying to reach, right? So whether we're talking about, medicine and healthcare, if we're talking about drug use, that has been a big thing going on right now. So one of the things that we were talking about as it pertains to my field, because we were trying to think of ways in which we can relate the research that we're doing. So looking at drug addiction, right, and how the implications that has on members of the Black community, right? So if we're saying that, drug use is bad all around and people have been using that like, oh, it does all of these things. And so it's so negative, that criminalizes it in a way that that predominantly affects members of low-income communities, members of the Black community, of Hispanic communities, right? They're more prone to policing because of this, and it's because of the science that we're saying, like, oh yeah, drugs are bad, therefore everyone who does drugs should be automatically criminalized. And I don't necessarily think that that's how things should go, right? Drug addiction is a disease like anything else, and it should be treated as such. It shouldn't be criminalized in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to the BMI, I completely agree. I think it is completely arbitrary. And just the other day, I was learning about how we have this thing called the lipostatic set point, if you've heard of that, where your body kind of has like a set like range that it's at, and that's where it's like comfortable. And then moving out of that range in terms of either gaining or losing weight is incredibly difficult because your body like essentially wants you to stay at that point, and it thinks that that is the most healthy point for you. So it's really like hard for people to kind of you know dip in and out. And so it's just interesting that we've kind of created like an ideal that, first of all, doesn't work for minorities. It may not apply to women. It may not apply to, disabled folk. Like there's so many sort of interactions that can happen. And I think when we create these systems, they are very much looking at one dimension. So yeah, I completely agree with you. But just moving forward, do you think the idea of having a white lens in science affects how science is taught and understood?
Yes, it definitely is, and I think that so one of the things I'm very passionate about teaching. That is like my absolute favorite thing to do. I love talking to students. I love allowing them to see themselves, right, both in the field, but also just to understand like science is this. It's not this very difficult thing that you like absolutely cannot understand, especially neuroscience. When people are like, oh yeah, like I'm a neuroscientist, they're like, oh my gosh, and I'm like, I feel like it's, it's not like it's this, completely foreign concept that's incredibly difficult. Yes, it's hard, don't get me wrong, but anyone can learn it, right? Like all of these things that we do within the field, they should be accessible for anyone to be able to learn. And so my main reason for bringing that up is when you have, when you're teaching through this white lens, when you are only showing studies that are focused, using white researchers, using white patients, using, white everyone, right? Then it's really difficult as a represented person to break into the feel like you belong within these fields and that you can do this research too, and to do the research on the populations that you really care about, because we do want to know how these things affect our communities, right? If we're talking about like Alzheimer's disease or something, we don't just want to know how that affects, the older white population, but we want to know how that affects Black people too, right? Like we want to know how that affects the Asian population. We want to know how that affects all of these different populations. And so if you're only looking at white people, right, you're missing out on all of these different groups, and it might not be the same for everyone. And so it is incredibly important to look at all those different things. But also even just teaching people, right? Like whenever I have my classes, I always make sure that I use diverse examples. I make sure I'm showing research done by Black and brown scholars. I make sure that, the pictures that I'm using include like disabled students, and it includes, people of all different races and ethnicities, because even just seeing yourself in the classroom allows you to connect with the work in a way that, when you're only using white examples, just does not.
Yeah, for sure. I think representation
is one of the most important things you can do in any field, especially when you're looking at the sciences, which historically have not ever included women, the BIPOC community, disabled community. If there's any way that we can unlearn our own biases.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, for sure. Do you think there's anything that we can do to unlearn our own bias?
Yes. So I think one of the best things you can do is to just start educating yourself on it. So, everyone has these their own implicit biases, and that has everything to do with the way that we're taught, the things that, we were taught as we were raised, right? Just the way that we're brought up. And so it is hard. It's very difficult to try to go back and unlearn those biases, especially when they're so deeply ingrained into who you are. However, if we're trying to move forward, as a community and really trying to uplift everyone within our community, we have to know what our biases are and be willing to confront them, because unintentionally we're then excluding people from certain opportunities, right? Like, you're not in a position to be able to uplift someone else because you don't even recognize that you're holding them back. And so being able to do that, like, the first step is just recognizing it. It's just admitting that you have certain biases to certain things, and everyone does, right? It doesn't make you a bad person. And I think that first step is so important, because I think a lot of people have trouble going over that hurdle, right? Because they don't want to be like, oh no, I'm not biased against minorities. I love Black people, right? Like, that's the thought process behind it. And that's not necessarily what we're saying. What we're saying is, if you have, a Black woman candidate and you have a white male candidate, and their CVs and their resumes are exactly the same, but you give the position to the white male because he's a white man, that's where the problem is.
Yeah, sure.
Hurdles that I feel
think
like.
Tariro has got the...
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're all good.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. So I was just saying, I think it's an interesting hurdle that kind of like marginalized communities kind of have to take on, is biases in the workplace, and just figuring out how to move up and kind of make your way in a world that is suited towards the white man. And it can be tough because you kind of have this expectation to go above and beyond. Has that ever been something that you've seen within your career, that expectation to be like not only good at what you do, but great at what you do?
Oh, absolutely. All the time. It is overwhelming sometimes, because you feel like, when you make a mistake. So I was the only, Black student within my lab for a long time. And it's like, I don't want to mess up, because then, my advisor might not want to take on another Black student. So it's not like it's just me, but it's like overall. And I know that's not the case. Like, she's great. And I know she would. But still, it's like that internalized, way of thinking. When you are the only one in the room, you have to perform not just for yourself to do well, but for your entire race, right? Or for your entire gender, or for your, entire ethnicity, and showing that, like, yes, we're capable of doing this. Yes, we absolutely can succeed. Yes, we deserve to be here. And when you make a mistake, you feel like you're not just letting yourself down, but you're letting everyone else down too. And I think that the standards are so higher. And even when we're talking about being able to, like, get grants, right? So if you're, applying for a fellowship or a grant or a scholarship or something, right? There's this, it's such a double-edged sword, because it's, oh, I think that, because you're a Black person, of course you're going to get it, because, you're Black. So of course they want to give it to a minority person. They're trying to check this box, right? But at the same time, it's like, well, because you're Black, then they think that you're not as qualified for it, or that, all these other things were handed to you. So therefore, we're going to make it even harder for you to get this thing. And so you're still working twice as hard, but receiving half the credit for it. And that has happened countless times. I recently accepted a faculty position, and I'm very excited about that. However, someone did comment and was like, oh, my first thought was she got this because she's Black. Not even looking at my, immense CV, all of the hard work that I've put in, all the publications that I have, all of the outreach that I've done, the DI efforts I've done, leading Black and Neuro, this international organization. But the assumption was I got this position because I'm a Black woman, and because they just needed a Black woman, in the department, which is completely not true at all, but it is incredibly frustrating sometimes to have to be the one to, to have that balance and explain to people that this is much more difficult than, just being the only Black face in the room. Like, there's so much more pressure associated with that.
Yeah, I think it's something that people don't actually understand, that it's not just the diversity hire. You actually have to perform. And not only do you have to perform, you have to perform arguably at a higher level than your peers. So is there anything else that you'd like to kind of add on or say about this topic of kind of like diversity in science, that our viewers would find interesting or informative?
Yeah, I mostly just want to say that, if we're talking about ways in which we can increase diversity in science, if we're talking about how to encourage more Black and brown scholars to, not only get into this field, but want to stay, they need mentorship and guidance and support, right? If you're like, oh, I don't know what I can do, as an undergraduate student or as a graduate student to support people, there's so much that you can do, right? Especially since most of us are first generation students as well. So it's not like we have someone in our family guiding us and like holding our hand and showing us the way. So if you are privileged in that way and you do know how to, apply for these different fellowships and grants, if you know to apply to fill out these graduate school applications, to do all of these things, one of the best things you can do is to help someone else, right? Is to, offer support, not in a you don't know how to do this kind of way, but in a I'm here as a resource to help you if you want it. And I think that's really something that anyone is able to do.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much. And if it's all right with you, can we jump into some of the questions that our guests have sent in? Awesome. So I'll read out some of the ones that we have via Instagram, DM, and Twitter first. So first off, can you tell me a bit about your new role at the University of Minnesota?
Yeah, so it is an assistant professor position. So my job is split essentially where 50% of my time is focused on teaching. So I'll be teaching introductory neuroscience courses to undergraduates. I'm really excited about that because, as I mentioned, I really love teaching. So that's like 100% what I want to do. And it's a little bit different in that, so I'm not running my own research lab. And that was difficult in itself to explain, like, why I'm going to graduate school and want to get a PhD, but I'm not interested in running my own research lab. But there are so many different careers that you can have with a PhD that do not involve running your own research lab, right? Like, there's so much out there. And for me, I went to graduate school because I knew I wanted to teach, because I knew this is where I feel like I can have the most impact in the world. So I'm really excited to do that. And then the other half of my job is to lead my own DEI initiatives. So pretty much anything that I come up with that I want to do that I feel like will impact the community, that will help the students, whether it's K through 12 students or undergraduate students or graduate students, or, even my colleagues and faculty there, anything that I feel like, will help create a safe space for these students and allow them to see themselves within the field is what I'm going to be able to do. So I'm really excited to have the freedom to be able to do that.
Amazing.
That is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's very inspiring, especially for me personally. I also kind of I don't want to have a research lab of my own. That's not necessarily my dream, but I do know where I think my impact on the world will be. And it's not teaching, but it's counseling. And I think it's the same kind of idea where we need more Black professors. I personally have not had any Black professors in my time at university, and we need more Black counselors. So, it's kind of hand in hand. It's all about representation, right? So yeah, I find that truly inspiring. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. No, that's such a big deal. Having like Black counselors and Black professors is just, it helps students so much, because having like that extra step of guidance and support without having to explain some of the nuances that are associated with being Black, right? So like, you being a Black counselor, a Black student wouldn't necessarily have to explain this racist incident and like why it's affecting them and like why they might be having trouble with, certain things, because you understand it, right? Whereas if you had to explain it to a counselor of a different race, it makes it more difficult. Right. And also like being a Black professor, like I understand, some of the hurdles that my Black students will have to experience, also coming from a low income background, right? Like I understand you for the most part can't just volunteer in a lab, right? Like you need to make money because you have bills to pay. Like for the most part, it's not even just your bills, it's also sometimes family bills and stuff too. And so these are certain nuances of these experiences that someone who comes from a more privileged background might not understand. And so I'm glad I get to advocate for my students in that way.
That's amazing. So just reading another one of our questions. What was the most interesting thing you've learned in your work?
Oh, the most interesting thing. I think it was just really interesting. Uh, uh, so within my research specifically, the sex differences is incredibly interesting to me. So I, never really thought about why a lot of these studies are done mostly in males, whether it's in humans or in animal models, and how important it is to really look at both. And there are whole fields that are really looking at, these sex differences as it pertains to different aspects of disease. And so I think that really pushing that, I talk about that a lot in like all of the talks that I give, about the importance of making sure that you're looking at, both males and females. And so that has been one of like the most interesting things for me, is just really understanding that and like starting to dive a little bit deeper into it, but also encouraging other people to make sure that they're looking at both as well.
Amazing. The next question we have are, what tips would you offer young women of color who are looking to get into the field of neuroscience or any field of science in general?
Yeah, so best tips for that would be, number one, just the reassurance that you can do this, right? Like there's no reason that you cannot do this. If this is something you want to do, you absolutely can get into it. The second thing would be to find a mentor, to find someone who is within the field, who, you can talk to, who can help guide you, right? Because it is difficult navigating it by yourself. Like there's so much I didn't know, and you don't know what to ask if you don't know, right? Like you don't even know where to start. You're not sure where, the types of questions to ask. And so I would say really finding a mentor, or two or three, right? Start with one, but someone who is within the field. You can, if you are a Black person, or even if you're not, if you would just like to have a Black mentor, right? So on the Black and Neuro website, we have tons of different profiles of hundreds of different neuroscientists all around the world. And so you can go on there, and they have like a little checkbox if they're okay with being contacted, or to be contacted for career advice or things like that. And so you can find someone. Like that's one of the best things about Black and Neuro for me, is that, we have this whole network now, and there are people that you can reach out to ask for advice. So I encourage you to, peruse the website, see who's on there, and find someone who can serve as a mentor to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I didn't even know about that service. I might like tap into that. I definitely need that. Oh my goodness. That's amazing.
No, really, like whatever field, like there are so many Black scientists doing so many different things in different countries too. So if you're trying to find someone, in Canada, like there are people there who might be doing similar work as you, who can offer, guidance and support as you're filling out applications, or as you're, just trying to navigate this higher education system. Like that's really what it's for. And I have not met a single person who is not more than glad to offer their time and resources to someone who's trying to figure it out.
Absolutely. So we've got another question here. Tim asks, does adolescent CBD exposure carry the same risks as THC exposure?
So CBD and THC are part of the same cannabis plant. So CBD has been used for pain management, epilepsy in particular, in pediatric patients. And so there's a lot more medicinal effects when it comes to CBD that have been uncovered already. THC is more like the compound that gives you that high feeling in cannabis. And so the thing with saying like whether or not one is more dangerous than the other, or more beneficial than the other. So any type of adolescent drug exposure, right, it changes your brain, right? So it works on this specific pathway within your brain. There's a reward pathway. It's called the limbic dopamine pathway, and so it releases this neurotransmitter called dopamine. And so that pathway is activated by natural rewards too. So when you have food or water, that's also activating that same pathway. And so what happens is the drugs come in, and then they hijack that pathway essentially, and they release dopamine, and so it makes you more prone to future drug taking behavior. So whether it is THC or CBD, right, you're still activating the same receptors, and you're also activating that pathway. So it does still change your brain and have potentially harmful effects, and could potentially change the ways in which you have future drug taking.
What are some of the risks associated with like adolescent exposure, other than just like increased exposure in the future?
Yeah, so of course with the increased exposure in the future, but also so beyond just like the normal, well, there's lots of a lot of things. So everything from if it's cigarette or nicotine exposure, right? You have the different lung cancers and the different lung disease, different cancers, all the different health problems that are associated with that, right? Because you're inhaling things into your lungs, right? And so that's still very harmful. In people think that e-cigarettes, so vaping, a lot of people have been really into vaping lately, and so even that exposure, although it's theoretically less harmful than cigarettes, there's it has been shown that certain vape devices do also contain trace amounts of like lead and nickel. You can get formaldehyde poisoning from them, right? There have been this evolved cases which are electronic vaping associated lung injury, and people have actually died from that, from vaping associated deaths. And so they're not harmless, right? It's not just air that you're inhaling. And then of course you can get addicted to nicotine and, you know, develop those substance use disorders.
Yeah, it's such a relevant issue now, especially I know when I was in first year, vaping was the big thing. Everyone vaped, and now I think
Mm-hmm.
research, like you just mentioned, is coming out about how it's quite dangerous, even more dangerous than some other kinds of drugs.
Yeah.
And the question we have are, what are the biggest accomplishments of Black and Neuro?
Oh, Black and Neuro has done so many things, and I'm so proud of us. So biggest accomplishments would definitely be just building this network, right? So we have, I think it's close to 500 now Black neuroscientists on our website who we have featured, which is incredible to me because, like I said, before I started Black and Neuro, I knew like a handful, like I knew maybe 5 tops of Black neuroscientists. And so to know that there are just hundreds around the world, and that's not even everybody, right? Those are just the ones who have happened to make a profile on our website. But that has been absolutely incredible. Every year we host Black and Neuro Week, which is just a week in July that is dedicated to Black scholars in neuroscience related fields. So everyone from Black neuroscientists, Black neuroengineers, Black psychiatrists and psychologists, Black neurologists, right? If you're in medicine or, you know, in academia or in industry, if you're Black and you know, are working for the NIH and a neuroscience related discipline, like all of those things really just celebrate those people. And we talk about their research. We talk about neuroracism. So we talk about, you know, historical context of racism within the field, but also current issues of racism and discrimination that Black scholars face. And those are very well attended. We tend to have over like 2,000 registrants. And last year we did or 2 years ago, we did a Black and Neuro mini conference. And, you know, that was a chance for Black scholars to present their research, right? So they were able to do poster presentations, and we had, again, thousands of participants from over 65 different countries, which was really nice. And so it's been great, the growth there. But just the community, I think, has been the best part of it. Anytime we have like socials and we bring the community together and people are just like, I just needed this space to be able to, you know, be Black and like talk about my research, but also like talk about other things that are on my mind, and, you know, just to feel like I'm not alone in this. I think that has been one of the best parts of doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next question, Mensa asks, how did you find the process of applying to UCI's PhD program, especially as a Black woman?
So, as I mentioned, I am a first generation college student. So that means I'm the first person in my immediate family to get a college degree. And my parents were not helpful when it came to applying to college. So they definitely weren't helpful when it came to applying to grad school. And, you know, nothing against them. It's just they just didn't know how. They couldn't help me. And so applying to graduate school, I was only going to apply to 5 programs. I freaked out the day applications were due. It was like December 1st, and like, you know, they're due at midnight. And so it was like 10 p.m. And I was like, there's no point in me applying. I'm not going to apply anywhere. Like, they're not going to accept me. So why would I even bother? And I had like this whole existential crisis. And I called a friend and I was just like, I don't think I'm going to do this. Like, there's no point. And she was just like, apply anyway. The worst they can do is tell you no. And I was like, all right, I guess. I don't want to hear no, but sure. I'll apply anyway. I ended up submitting 4 applications, and I actually got 3 interviews, which was very exciting. when I was interviewing, and I really hope, whoever asked this question take this to heart, I made sure to ask questions about the things that were important to me. So just as they're interviewing you, you're interviewing them, right? So I made sure to ask questions about, as I mentioned, teaching was really important to me. So how supportive the department was when it came to graduate students teaching, because usually having TA experience or like being a teaching assistant isn't the same as getting like formal instructor of record experience where like you are the instructor. And so I asked questions about that. I asked questions about, the type of support they had for Black women, right? Like within these different programs, like how would I be supported as a Black woman on campus? And I asked that to every single person who I interviewed with, because I felt like, if I'm interviewing with 3 different faculty members and only one of them can answer me, that's a little concerning, right? Like if only one of them can tell me the type of support that they have in place, for a Black woman, that's very concerning. And so I asked about that. I also asked about what types of like mentorship opportunities, because I love doing mentorship and outreach as well. And so I asked about the things that were really, really important to me. And I think that really helped in my decision and feeling comfortable. So I had 3 interviews, like I said. UCI was actually the only place that I got formally accepted to. So I was waitlisted for one and I was rejected from the other. And honestly, it is the best place that I thought, that I wanted to be. And it was like number 1 on my list. I thought after the interview, I'm like, there's no way they're going to accept me, but it would be so cool to come here. And they did end up accepting me, which was amazing. And so I often do feel like, I've said this before, that I think rejection is just redirection. And so being rejected from those other schools was probably the best thing, because if I had gotten accepted there, I might have gone there, and that's not where I was supposed to be.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's such an important mindset to have if you're pursuing anything in life. And I'm really glad you brought that up. Natalie asks, what inspires you to get into neuroscience, and what keeps you motivated when you're feeling overwhelmed?
So as I mentioned, when I was applying to graduate programs, I was very open. I just knew I wanted to teach. I knew I needed a PhD so I could be a college professor. I didn't really care so much what I got it in. Neuroscience just kind of happened because I only applied to interdisciplinary or interdepartmental programs, and UCI happened to have an interdepartmental neuroscience program. I love it. I'm so glad they're in neuroscience now, but it wasn't like I had in my mind, this is exactly what I'm going to do. But as far as what motivates me to keep going, it's really the future students that I'm going to have. It is the community. It's my Black and Neuro community. It's like all of the outreach that I've done. It's knowing that there are other Black girls who need to see someone like me doing the things that I'm doing, to know that they can do it too.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Kind of ties in with your last point. What inspired you to get into? Oh, sorry. What are some things that what are some things that you hope to do within both your career and Black and Neuro?
Really all I'm trying to do is to just open doors for other people. That's what I want to do within my career. That's what I want to do with Black and Neuro. It's just to create this space so that other people can really have a chance to succeed, because a big part of it is, first of all, seeing that this is a possibility, right? So hopefully by me doing this, by having, the Black and Neuro community out here, it's showing that this is completely possible for anyone to do, right? These are all 100% possible things for people to accomplish. And that, if you do decide to, you have this community, you have this support, right? Like, we are here to support you. We will give you whatever resources. We will connect you to our network. We will, do whatever it is that you need so you can succeed. And to me, that's how I can open doors for other people. It's like, I might not have all the money in the world, but I can still provide you access to these opportunities. I can let you know what the funded opportunities are. I can give you the grant applications that I had that were successful, right? So that way you have something to model it after. It's just, for me, it is diversifying the neurosciences, not necessarily by having my own research lab, but allowing someone else the chance to be able to have theirs.
Absolutely. That was a beautiful point to end on. I think that is the end of our questions. Lilo, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, for sure. So we just wanted to thank you so much for sitting down with us today. I know everyone really enjoyed the wonderful conversations we've been having, and we just really appreciate your time and your perspective. And if no one else has any other questions, we'll sign off for the night. But if anyone else has any questions, feel free to comment them. This will be saved on our Instagram feed, and then we can access them.
Well, thank you both for having me. This has been such a pleasure to chat with you. Feel free to out anytime, you know, especially as you move forward in your careers, right? If there's anything I can do, I'm more than glad to help. Even if I don't know the answer, I'm sure I can hopefully connect you with someone who does.
Thank you so much. Good night. Bye.
Good night.